Please welcome to the stage from E&C lead partner Bart Verest, and as well from E&C, Emma Nocquet-Wass, Energy Procurement and Transition Consultant. So Bart and Emma are going to dive straight into regulation and all the changes that have happened in recent years that have enabled more production flexibility. They're going to explore what future developments might look like as we move towards the factory of the future. But they'll also share some case studies, some real-world examples of all the changes and challenges and opportunities that various programs have brought with them, such as demand response and other things that they will entertain us with. Take it away.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome after the coffee break at the session where we will talk about opportunities and challenges on production flexibility. So for today, we will walk you through some introduction and some changes that we see happening in the energy markets in general, and that is quite broad. That could be forward markets, that could be day-ahead markets, intraday markets, ancillary services, showing us how markets and reality is changing. But we will try to guide you through that challenge and see how that challenge brings opportunity, what approach you can take there, what tools that you have in your energy procurement and in your daily business to make that into an opportunity. After that, we will dive a bit deeper into the regulatory part. I saw some shivering around the room when we talked about the topic of regulatory. We'll keep that part brief, but we want to talk you through to see what changed in the past, what is going on at this moment in time, and what to expect going forward to make sure that you can prepare for that. And at the end, we want to give some examples, some business cases of different parts of the industry, of different types of production, different people in the energy world, and see if there are any examples that you can use and take away for yourself before we come to a conclusion and into a roadmap for success for yourself.
Okay. So as Bart mentioned, we tried to make this topic a bit glamorous, so that it's not just regulatory. Let's start by first clarifying what we mean with production flexibility. So this is not about energy production. This is about your own core of business production, whether it's Coca-Cola, forklifts, pharmaceutical, paper, etc. Why it's very important is because your production and the pace of it, the process, dictates your consumption pattern. If we look at the key challenges that energy buyers and head of procurements are facing, you know them very well, you face them every day or every week. We have high and volatile energy costs. We've mentioned these multiple times now, especially since the energy crisis. Market and contract complexity, which is in turn very linked with the energy transition. Intraday market volatility and decision-making that is made more complicated by the fact that we are faced with energy transition continuing at high speed, grids being challenged by that transition. We've bucketized these items into three main ones because these are the ones that you're probably most challenged by. So the cost of energy, this is one that we've discussed already multiple times this morning, and one that probably your management or C-level is most interested in, the energy transition and grid costs, because this is also an unprecedented increase in energy costs in general. So let's start with the cost. So first off, we have, and this is an overview, a changing energy market. We've discussed it at great length this morning, but since the energy crisis, we have seen a shift in types of contracts, sizes, in prices, etc., etc. So if we look at the cost first, you can see on the left-hand side gas prices on year +1, and on the right-hand side electricity prices for Germany. We've chosen Germany because it's a mature electricity market in Europe, so it's easy to track the market variations. So we have seen in the last 15 months, so you can see here at the very end of the graph for 24-25, more extreme volatility than what we've seen in the past decade if we exclude the energy crisis because it's a very specific moment in time. But if you look at 2009 to 2019 and even pushing it towards 2021, so really last 12 years, there's more extreme volatility, and this is very visible for electricity, where prices reached peak levels during 2022. Why is it important? Because as an energy buyer, this impacts your bottom line and the budget in general. If you're fixing long term, you still need to be very on it, either because with the help of a consultant or with your own procurement team, but you need to be tracking future prices for year plus one more closely than ever before. This does not only impact future prices, it also impacts intraday volatility, if we look at spot market. So you might think, okay, long-term prices are expensive, then maybe I stay on the spot market and I see how this evolves. This is also not a very good solution. You need to have integrated solution, what works best for your company, but you can see intraday volatility, if we look again at the electricity market in Germany, is higher than we have ever seen. If you look in light blue is a month plus one, and in dark or in black is year plus one. So you can see in 2025, month plus one, intraday variations can reach above 15%. So this has an important impact, again, on your budget. If we look at the ASA report from 2024, you can see that the share of days during which electricity prices rose over 50 euro per megawatt hour is of 70%. That's a seven-fold increase compared to 2019, 2020. Again, during the energy crisis, we saw that this rose significantly, but we're still closer to these levels than we were pre-crisis, so it's clearly not behind us. We can also see a link with the imbalance costs, because if we look at spot market, we discussed again this morning the Dunkelflaut, or the impact of renewables. Imbalance cost is also one of the components that is very important for you, because either you have renewables on-site or off-site. If your consumption is not the one that was announced to the supplier and that was communicated to the grid, the nominations are wrong, the supplier has to pay a penalty. So what you can see here is the total imbalance volume in grey, and in yellow, the imbalance price. So the more there's an imbalance in terms of volume, the more there's an imbalance in terms of price, and the cost becomes very high. Some suppliers will pay the cost themselves, so you need to make sure that this is in your contract, but most suppliers will actually pass through the cost, which again, as an energy buyer or head of procurement, you want to take into account. Now, with the rise of renewables, we also see an increasing share of hours with negative prices. If we look on the other side of the world, especially as South Australia, for example, where it's over 25% of hours have negative prices, it's not much. It looks like a peaceful walk, or barely even a hike, except if you focus on the beginning. Less than 5 years ago, we were around 0 to 1% of hours with negative prices. And now, if you focus specifically on Nordic countries, we're closer to 8%, most countries 4%. So again, this is a significant shift to what we've known in the last 5 years. And obviously, this is usually at a time where your renewable is producing a lot, or that you need to sell it, so not an optimal time. All of this is linked not only to the energy transition, also to a global context of geopolitical tensions, for example, the weather, etc. But we also see that the energy transition has an impact on how prices evolve. It's not a bad thing, but it needs to be taken into account. To look at the energy transition more specifically, so you may remember this may actually look like one of your factories, the past factory where you had one set of contract, one for gas, one for electricity, and a direct connection to the grid via supply, for example. Maybe interruptibility mechanisms, but not much more. And you're moving to, or maybe you're already there with some of the components, to the factory of the future, where you have a set of contracts. Maybe you have injection if you have on-site renewable too, but you potentially have solar panels, wind turbines, maybe a methanizer, depending on your goals, EVs, which a lot of companies now also have, and you need to manage how the cars are charged. Potentially you do injection on the other side. So clearly there's increasing complexity, and this dictates your profile load and how your profile looks like. Why is it important? Because when we look at the factory of the future, you can clearly see that we're moving from one factory to a factory that has a lot of electricity, and the share of electricity is only going to keep on growing. Because if you look at the industry sector and commercial and public services, and this is where it becomes interesting for you, in the industry sector, electricity represents over 30% of the energy mix, while commercial and public services is 51.3%. This share of energy is the one that is very subjected to change due to renewables, intraday volatility, etc. So you want to be sure that you optimize this part of your energy. It will only keep on growing if we look at the decreasing share of batteries and increasing share of electric vehicles. The adoption rate of these technologies will only grow, meaning that for you it's even more important that you look specifically at electricity. To support this fact, we can see, if you look at the graph again from the IEA, that the fossil fuels are slowly being phased out. If we look at their growth between 23 and 24, most of them have decreased. While if we look at renewables, solar PV, for example, has increased by 200 terawatt hours just in the space of 1 year. So again, electrification is on its way, especially to make sure that we fulfill the goals that are set by Fit for 55, the Green Deal, etc., European goals for decarbonization. The increase in renewables is also very visible. This graph, some of you may recognize from our market presentation or market analysis. What we want to focus on here is the yellow line, which represents solar, and the green line, which represents wind. So again, you can see sharp increase throughout the year, with exception of wind this year, because we had a bit of a rocky start with a record low level of wind production, but this is more meteorological than the installation's fault. But if you look at solar, and this is what was mentioned earlier in Jensen's and Benedict's presentation, solar will only keep on growing. And we can see again that we're 3 percentage points at the same time this year than last year above. So again, this is an important point of focus for your business. Finally, grid costs. We've talked about the energy transition. This affects the grid. There's no transition without transmission. What does that mean? If the share of renewable grows, the capacity that needs to be moving on the grid increases. If the grid is not ready, you might have all of the technologies available, but you're not able to use them. You cannot inject. Maybe you will have to join a queue to feed in or offtake. We can see on this map that most Western European countries are quite well prepared to the grid adaptation to renewables, while the Central and Eastern European bloc is a bit less prepared for the additional capacity. This leads, as I was saying, to potential congestion. So we see in the Netherlands, for example, that when the grid is extremely congested in some areas, you might have to join a queue. You have to wait to pull extra capacity from the grid. In France, we see also that mainly in the north, there's quite a good preparation for batteries, so renewables in general and battery storage. However, in the rest of the country, again, we need to see a bit more development to make sure that the grid can take the additional capacity from batteries. As the tension on the grid increases, so does the risk of blackout, because as you will know from buying electricity, the grid always needs to be at a balance. If somewhere someone off-takes too much or someone off-takes too less and it's not balanced properly, there will be a blackout. So what we saw in Spain is not necessarily due to renewables. We still don't have a specific answer for the issue, but these types of blackouts, maybe some of you have facilities in Spain, will know that it causes significant harm to your business because you have to put your business on a halt for the whole day, and potentially can also harm your installations. So, in the face of all of these challenges, because it's not all doom and gloom, there are some solutions, and also as energy buyers, you learn a lot and you know that there's always something that you can do. We want to look at how you move these challenges towards being an opportunity. So when you look at all the challenges that were presented, there are 3 approaches. This is sort of a general strategy. Either you can be passive, so you continue business as usual, thinking that either it will stop, maybe it will improve without doing anything. Maybe you pass through the cost to your customer, but this has a certain limit because either your business model doesn't allow it, or your customer gets sick of the cost being passed through to them, and eventually you lose competitiveness. So this is not possible. In general, this is not an option that we recommend. The second one would be gambling, so you expect prices to decrease without a strategy. We discuss this very often when elaborating energy procurement strategy. Gambling is not necessarily the best one, depending on what you want, but in general it just means that it's a shot in the dark. So you never know what is going to happen. Expecting prices to decrease is like expecting prices to go in any direction. It's not possible. Unless you have a crystal ball, it's not an option that is viable. So what is left, the core of the topic, is active production flexibility management. So you embrace the changes and you integrate production flexibility, so again, your own production, so that you can modulate your demand and how your profile looks, so you integrate it in your energy procurement strategy and it becomes one of your goals. What is production flexibility exactly? So it's a company's ability to change what it does, how it does it, what the production is, and the quantity, with a goal of limiting the impact and disruption in terms of budget, time, and resources allocated. Why it's important? Because it helps you reduce uncertainty by being in control of the situation. And this is what this presentation is all about. You want to be more in control of all of the uncertainties that we've mentioned initially. You want to adapt to dynamic pricing markets, because we've seen that markets are evolving quicker than ever with the extreme volatility. Participate in grid resilience. Either this is voluntary, in some countries it is actually mandatory, so you need to start looking into demand response. You reach decarbonation targets faster, because if you're only consuming when renewables are extremely high, you're emitting less in theory, and you gain competitive advantage, because lower costs mean that your product is more competitive or your company makes more benefit. Overall, the goal is to optimize your bottom line by adapting your energy demand. So you can either optimize the network costs by working with the grid, or you can optimize the energy bill, the commodity price directly. Now, let's dive into the tools on how you can implement this flexibility.
So if we think back of the three approaches that we had, coming from the passive one, the gambling, of the really active flexibility management, then it's good to see that at that same time when these changes appear in the market, that we also see changes and evolution appearing in the tools that are available. Thinking about the same three categories that we did there, on one hand looking at price, on the other hand looking at energy transition, and thirdly looking at the grid, we see that from a price perspective there are opportunities now for load shifting your process, going into dynamic consumption, tracking that dynamic consumption like we saw in examples earlier today. Checking into the options for imbalance costs in your supply contracts to see which of the two approaches fits with your supply strategy, going from a pass-through of imbalance cost or a fixed imbalance cost in there. Looking at energy transition, some of the tools and approaches we have there is going into renewables, included in your procurement contract, investing in renewables on site. So this is the kind of reality and the new opportunities that we see appearing at this moment in time. And then lastly, looking at the grid, we see more and more of a mature realization of demand response programs, more accurate forecasts or nominations that can play a significant role into your own approach there. When we map those opportunities and tools that you have, we can see that there are differences in the purpose that they serve on one hand, but also difference in the time where they materialize. Going from short-term, almost near real-time, into day option, week option, or really long-term, monthly or yearly option. Looking at demand-side response, we see a time span there from few seconds, really short term into a bit longer term, later into the day, or even day and week options for demand response. On-site batteries, again, from very short reactive times up to longer lead times. PV wind turbines, where we saw flexibility that allows you from shorter term up to a bit longer periods. But luckily enough, we have also some of the longer term options which we will need throughout time, coming from energy efficiency measures, hydrogen, biomethane, more of an interconnection of electricity network, the grids, interconnection, Spain, France, being a very active one at this moment in time, or long-term storage like hydrothermal storage and so on. If we focus on this group of demand response programs, then we see that there are a few options. One could be a pure price-based program, or on the other hand, we also see sometimes monetary incentivized programs. So the one is more implicit, it is out there. For example, a time of use tariff is implicit, it is there, you just have to make sure that you react to it and adapt to it, whereas some of the monetary incentives that come from more explicit demand response really give you a fee for activation. The reason you do it and the reason you get a financial incentive for it is more the limitation of impact of the imbalance that we see appearing in the grid and improving the grid stability overall. Of course, that is the bigger society advantage. There must be something in there for you as well, and that is optimizing that bottom line. The underlying idea is, just like with your energy procurement strategy, that you want to make sure that your energy procurement is linked to the P&L risk of your company. This is exactly doing the same. How can I protect the P&L of my company in this current reality that we are in? And we see then that regulation, both in explicit and implicit ways, is adapting to that. The way you monetize that yourself is by directly participating in demand response programs via a TSO or a DSO, or via an aggregator where you bring together some of the flexibility that you have on site. The underlying idea is that you prepare for it, you sign contracts, you have a transition of energy agreement, for example, or demand response agreement. When the need is there, you respond to it, and then afterwards, when the need is over, you restore to a more normal situation. So when we look at the main demand response programs that are out there, so we have on one hand those price-based, the time of use tariff is one. It's a period-based price signal that is used to households and small and medium enterprises nowadays already. What we see is that this is appearing more and more into industrial users. The number of debates of time of use DSO tariffs or TSO tariffs is increasing significantly. So this is something that we can expect to expand towards industrial consumers. At this moment in time, most of the need for industrial consumers, or most of the availability for industrial consumers, is from really incentive-based programs like interruptible load, where you have a curtailment contract, for example, or you do some demand bidding, you bid into a capacity market like in Poland or France or Belgium, for example, or you participate into auxiliary services with your CHP, with your gas turbine, with your battery, and that makes your case of getting rewarded and paid for grid stability services. So those are the three very active options that we see that are really maturing into the market and are applicable to you as an industrial and large use consumer, or via an aggregator if you have smaller volumes. I remember back in the day, when we looked for flexibility, we were looking for megawatt volumes. That's not necessary anymore. Looking into options for aggregators, you can go 100 kilowatt flexibility. That could be an overcapacity in your installation. That could be some chiller. It could be any small part of the processing, delay of a certain painting process that could help you participating in one of those options, either yourself or via an aggregator. The third one is that hybrid model. So that's where the aggregator comes in, where you not directly participate yourself with the TSO or the DSO, where they basically pool assets. Sometimes there is an advantage to it. We have certain customers that in theory could go to the market themselves. They have, let's say, an upward flexibility, but they decide to go to an aggregator to pool that with some downward flexibility. And that way, similar to the solar and the wind optimization you get in your profiles, you get this kind of optimization here as well in this hybrid model with your aggregator, where you say we pull upside and downside potential. For some of it, it might sound like, okay, maybe it's something that I should start preparing for. It's something that is upcoming. Later on, we will see what happened already in the past, what's present, and what is future. Well, we can say this is back to the future. It is out there already. This is a Dutch example where you see time of use, where you see grid contracts that are flexible. You don't get the certainty of a baseload grid connection, but you get an interruptible grid contract. Or you get a grid contract only when you install also batteries. So this is the reality that we see in the Dutch case at this moment in time already. Of course, the speed of implementation is not the same everywhere. If we have a look and we cherry-picked some of the countries to make differences there, we see a bit of a leading role, for example, at this moment in time for France, for Belgium, which have a quite high maturity of demand response, and the reason for that is sometimes different. In both France and Belgium, they have independent roles for aggregators, so they really helped kicking off that market, pooling those small flexibilities that otherwise would not have found their way to the market. They also, both of them had capacity markets. We really helped with a financial incentive to get those volumes into the market, whereas some other countries have different incentives, but are still at a high maturity. For example, Finland has a very high maturity of meter penetration of real-time metering. So this played a key role, for example, in Finland. Then we see more of an average country, like, for example, Netherlands, where that role of aggregator is a bit more limited than, for example, what we see in France, where there is more of a local pilot, but less of a global mature or national mature market. And then we see some countries lagging behind, like Italy, which has more of a restricted aggregation model, or, for example, Germany, where we have a lower penetration of meter integration. This is what it looks like on a European map, where on the left-hand side you see that role of aggregation being more mature in certain countries, and on the right-hand side you see the uptake of dynamic contracts being more mature in certain countries versus others. So this is the kind of reality that determines what you can do in certain countries. A very recent change and example there is what we have seen with the Picasso market, where AFRR markets are being pooled on a European level. Italy recently stepping into that market, and this really helps to generate liquidity and volumes in those markets. Same for the Mari market, where Belgium recently joined for its MFRR volumes. So there you can really see that maturity of the markets, bringing liquidity and helping to be tools that you can use more and more on a daily basis.
So now that we've learned about the tools, let's look at the past, present and future regulatory framework. Just one precision maybe, AFRR and MFRR are automatic frequency restoration reserve and manual frequency restoration reserve. So let's look at the past of production flexibility or demand side management. So in the past, this is what we consider to be pre-2020. So we can sort of start in 2009 with the third energy package, which introduced more consumer empowerment and smart meters. And we moved then in 2012 to the Energy Efficiency Directive, which again promoted smart meters. We see quite a strong adoption rate from then on. And demand response emerged mainly as need from the market due to an increase in renewables. At the time, so pre-2020, we had quite some limitations because aggregators were often excluded from the wholesale market, meaning that there was no ground really for demand response programs. It was for large industrials that had interruptible mechanisms and contracts in place with transport system operators or distribution system operators. So very limited. As Bart said, now up to 100 kilowatts, you can start looking into demand response programs. So very interesting. We see now, so 2020, 2025, not exactly the present, but very close times, that since the clean energy package in 2019, almost at 2020, aggregators got a legal definition of what they are, and they have to receive non-discriminatory access to the market, which means that obviously there's more of a market for demand response if they're allowed to access without also the agreement from the supplier. There's an increase in member state implementation, so this is the maps that you just saw, where we see that there's quite a high implementation of these technologies, more specifically in countries like France, Belgium, Finland, where there's either a capacity market or balancing market. So if you remember the slides from earlier on the imbalance costs, so there's an imbalance market and on capacity too. And digital infrastructures and market integration improved. So we talked about Finland a minute ago. Finland rate of smart meter adoption is now at 98%. So this is not just households. In France, for example, we have Linky. Most of your companies probably have one if it's a small meter, so you can track your consumption real time, and this will only keep progressing. It's the case, again, very developed in Finland and in France because it's mandatory. In other countries, it will only follow. And this is where we now discuss the future, because this is what we see. We say future, but it's not really the future. It's already there. So it's more what is happening in the next 6 months to 5 years. We'll see further electrification with the energy transition. As we showed, the share of renewable electricity will only grow, and in turn the share that electricity takes into your own energy mix will grow significantly to support grid stability and decarbonization plans such as, again, Fit for 55, for example, or the Green Deal. We see that in the next 6 months, so it's meant to be implemented in 2025 or 2026, so very soon, ACER and the European Network for Transport System Operators are collaborating to standardize the network code and give a clear definition of aggregators, demand response programs, all of the tools that you can use, pricing mechanisms, etc. So in the next year, you will have a much clearer definitions of all of the tools. Potentially, it might even look like a guide of what you can do step by step to modulate the production, because what's important is to know exactly what the regulatory framework is around it. Is it voluntary, or is it completely mandatory and you need to follow the obligations? Finally, in the future, and again, this is sort of already there, we'll see AI-driven aggregators and real-time data platforms will increase the use of blockchain. So with AI, we have to be careful that what we're talking about is not price forecasting. AI is really volume. So it would be an aggregator that is no longer physical, and that's using a portfolio leverage. It's an AI aggregator that can more or less accurately, and hopefully more accurately, predict the consumption of the whole portfolio so that it can then help you participate in demand response programs. So concretely right now, how is the regulation adapting? It's adapting via flexible connection agreements, so with your local DSO and TSO, with demand response markets and capacity markets, like the ones we have, for example, again, in France or in Belgium and Finland. We have opening up of markets to batteries. Remember the map of France at the very beginning, with the north of France being a bit further with the grid adaptation to batteries. European integration of frequency services markets, and energy taxes switching from volume to capacity. So what's important is not so much the megawatt hour, but the megawatt. Why are we insisting on the regulatory aspect of it? Because you can see on the right-hand side, you can have all of the technology. If the access to the grid is not allowed, or to the supplier, and that there's no collaboration between both, it's gridlocked, without doing a bad pun. But anything that you do has to be in relation with the regulation. So we see that in the future it's evolving, and we're moving more and more towards a possibility for businesses and companies to adapt their production. So your curve can effectively change to match what is happening on the market. So you're probably wondering now, what does it look like for my specific business? Because we've covered the tools, the regulatory, but how does it apply to you specifically?
So some of the first businesses that we see participating in this flexibility and have been doing for quite a long time is, for example, the paper industry, because it was a quite straightforward process for them. They are a continuous, energy-intense industry. They have limited production stoppages, but they have fixed production change. So very often they work with CHPs or gas turbines, which gave them the flexibility to participate in these markets back in the day when we had these 1 megawatt blocks that were needed to join the flexibility markets. They didn't need this democratization that we see nowadays of demand response and flexibility because they had big enough volumes and they had this kind of batch processes stops. They could shift or stop certain drying processes, delay those a bit. So we could see that they are doing this kind of work for quite a long time already. They were some of the first participants in those demand response programs. They scheduled certain pulping processes to be at night. They did the shifting between hours. So looking at some of the examples of shifting in time, it's something that worked for them. Spatial shifting, for example, for them, not possible. If you look at the tech industry, they are now doing more and more of this kind of exercises, but paper has been doing quite a lot of this already for a long time. For manufacturing, they have a bit more of a complex workflow. They have dependencies and interdependencies of their machines, and very often they have strict production deadlines. So what we have been seeing, and when we proposed and discussed this kind of topic some years ago, markets were not where they needed to be for them to really start doing this. I was able to recover some of the 2017, 2019 slides and had to update them, obviously, but from old slide decks where you could see this was discussed but not possible at that moment in time, and now you can see that they come back and say, well, we found your old slide deck, can we talk about it again, because now we see that opening up of access for batteries, non-discrimination for batteries, for example, or interruptible grid connections forces them or allow them to step into this, which was not possible for them in the past. And I think a lot of participants in the room today are in that second category of manufacturing, where in the past you had the impression it's not possible for me. I would say dig up those old slide decks again, look into them, because there are much more possibilities nowadays. And then retail customers, different ball game again for them, customer facing, very often customer facing hours with certain correspondence to peak hours, refrigeration, so some of the volume can be moved, some of it cannot, and you can imagine that they can still do things like LED optimization, but spatial moving in time and so on is much more difficult for them than for the first two categories.
And finally, to conclude the session, we wanted to walk you through the roadmap to success, so how to implement these tools effectively. It starts, the first step is always the same for every project, is to assess your needs and set goals. So when we say assess your needs, is assess where your business can shift the load. So for example, can you slow down during peak hours and have a higher intensity during off-peak hours? Or what type of KPI do you want to set? Do you want to set savings? Do you want to set a KPI to have contracts in place that has dynamic pricing depending on the time? Do you want to join a demand response program, etc.? So this is naturally the first step. Then you want to move into real-time energy monitoring, because to be able to participate either in demand response program or be flexible in your production, you need to know exactly what you're consuming at what time. And this is where the need for quality data kicks in. So if the data that you have initially is not the right granularity or is not good enough, this is going to be complicated. So you can either work with smart meters, for example, or you can work with your grid operator that will have your 5-minute or 10-minute or 15-minute data. In this case, you need to be very specific, because for demand response programs, for example, you might receive the signal, so you prepare for it with assessing where you can shift your production, etc. Then you need to respond. So you receive a text or an email or a call, and within 15 to 30 minutes, you need to slow down your activity and shift it to a different time, and then restore the frequency. So for this, you need to have very, very small granularity data. Then, and this also ties with what was discussed this morning by Coca-Cola and Kion is what we call cross-functional teams. You need to involve all of your teams because knowledge is power, and training the teams will ensure that everyone is on board with what you're trying to do, which again is optimize the bottom line, protect the P&L. Normally, everyone in the company should agree that this is important. But training is really the key here. Finally, you can implement energy management systems or SCADA, use flexibility technologies and AI tools with some limits, but it's still important, and profit from government incentives. So we strongly encourage you to check all government incentives that are available in your region, in your country, etc., to benefit from these, because you can receive monetary or financial compensation for shifting your demand because you're effectively helping the grid to be more stable. And all of this, to be a success, needs to be implemented in your energy procurement strategy. So this is sort of a new energy procurement strategy where flexibility is one of the key components. It's not just about being budget risk, protecting the budget at all costs, market risk, being close to the market, maintaining competitiveness, etc., or survival. It's really all together, and it's needed to face the challenges that we've discussed earlier. All of this allows you to be the energy buyer of the future. So you understand the transition and need for flexibility. You master your portfolio data by having quality data and thin granularity, and you start tell the story in your company. First, you own the narrative, you're in control of the costs. You fear the uncertainties less because you know that you can respond in many different ways with many different tools, and you can share it with all of your colleagues. So normally you will have learned during the session all of the tools that are available for production flexibility, how to adapt your demand, the regulatory framework, and you have all of the keys to answer the challenges that we've seen initially.